Alright guys, hope you're all keeping safe. Bank holiday weekend and I've already started building a pergola for our garden, so it should be a busy one. Recently, Joker Unique, on behalf of the devs, started this thread on Reddit for the next big title update, TU10, with 3 specific categories and questions for feedback. Today I wanted to go over the reward, progression, loot quality and vendor category and give my feedback on the questions raised. I encourage you guys to leave your feedback on these questions below, and also down there maybe you could leave a like, would really appreciate it. But that said, let's start. So I'm going to go in order on the Reddit post, the first question being, how is the character progression for you? Now, the leveling experience is fine from levels 1 to 40, the same as it was for the divisions from levels 1 to 30. You level up pretty fast, and you replace your gear with better gear pretty quickly, but it's when you reach the end game the experience is a little bit jarring, because it's quite the opposite of the level 1 to 40 experience. Once you have a good build, loot becomes very unreliable with very little dropping to actually help improve the build that you have. I've run the same M1A build with focus, all red, DPS since I reached endgame in Warlords of New York, and I found barely any loot to either replace or, more importantly, improve what I already have, and my build is only about 80% towards being min-maxed. Vendors are absolutely pointless, and crafting feels the same. The new recalibration library is good and at least gives me the motivation to play the game right now, trying to fill it out, but this can only last so long. Shade levels are fine, but with only incremental differences, they don't feel that impactful and thus don't give me at least much incentive to actually grind for them. To summarise, character progression is fine until you reach endgame, when things slow right down with minimal chance and minimal features to help increase that progression in a noticeable way. The next question is the content you do rewarding? What is not, and why? The short answer is sometimes it feels a little bit rewarding, but for the most part, on the whole, not really. The data I covered in a previous video showed the chance of getting a fully god-rolled item in the game on heroic, i.e. all 3 attributes dropping at maximum, is about 1 in 900. I've run challenging and heroic checkpoints for the last couple of days. In total, I've probably run around 25 to 30 or so, and not once did a full god rolled item drop. In fact, only about 1 or 2 items dropped with maybe 1 max roll, and that includes NPC drops and drops that you get from the supply room chest as well. Based on the data, with each control point dropping about 8 high-end items, it would take about 112 runs to get 1 god-rolled item, and that to me is just ridiculous. Challenging to me feels a lot more rewarding than heroic does, not because the drops roll higher or have a chance to roll higher, but it's because it takes half the time to do each activity, increases your chances of actually getting a high-rolled item almost twofold, it feels like. Gear mods, they drop too often. For me, the game offers very little reward for your time investment, and that's one of the major issues with loot right now. Maybe that's because the chance of getting an improvement for your build is very small, and even when you do, which does feel very good by the way, getting that little kind of triangle, that upwards triangle showing that you've got a god roll, or maybe just even something that's better than what you already have, there's very little content to actually use that improvement on. So even when you do feel rewarded, you can't use that reward, and that is again part of the issue. Moving on, the next question said, does the loot in heroic legendary content motivate you? If not, what would? Now, kind of going back to what I've said before, heroic content does not motivate me at all, because the chance of getting any improvement to your build or getting the exotic you want is still so astronomically low, even though that was meant to be the opposite for this particular expansion. The dev said you would get less loot but better loot with this update, and I'm just not really seeing it at all. The fact that challenging difficulty, which for a lot of people really is challenging, including myself sometimes, has a minimum roll percentage of like 30 to 40%, it might even be lower, with heroic maybe being 50%, it just shows that that statement is wrong and it's not been implemented correctly, because I don't know about you, but having 50% as the minimum roll percentage on a heroic is just far too low. Like I said previously, I think purple loot should be removed from all activities at endgame regardless of difficulty. It's not needed. What would motivate me more with heroic difficulty is a significant increase to the minimum roll percentage and a significant increase in the chance of getting god rolled items, plus maybe some difficulty specific vanity rewards like outfits, etc. Legendary does offer this, but to be honest, it's not enough. Vanity, along with gear, weapons and items, are very important rewards for higher difficulty activities, and I just don't feel like it's worth it right now. What I'm not saying is just fill it all with vanity stuff, because I don't think that's overly a very good incentive. I do think we need more gear, weapons, items, that sort of thing. The exotic bighorn for legendary completion is on a chance basis, a very low chance, and it's not a good exotic either. On a personal note, these higher rank difficulties, specifically legendary, are impossible as a solo player, regardless of the incentives you can put behind them for you to try and complete them. And I think this needs to be addressed. I believe only raid should require a group to complete. Legendary is impossible as a solo player. Next up, and what content do you skip because it does not feel rewarding? Right off the bat, Kenley College. I don't think any of you guys are going to be surprised with that comment. I got the Diamond back when it first came out, and I've never played it again. There is zero incentive to play this mode once you have the exotic, because the loot you can get from it can be gotten from other sources in half the time. There's, again, no incentive for the time invested in this particular mode, and also I just think the mode generally is just nowhere near as good as some of the modes we got from the Division, like, again, Survival or Resistance or Underground, for example. The same issue can be applied to other things in the game as well. The longer full missions like DARPA or Manning National Zoo, they take a significant amount of time to complete than something like Lincoln Memorial, for example, which has more bosses, so an increased chance of getting better loot in half the time. That's why people are farming Lincoln Memorial, because of that very reason. Conflict rewards are underwhelming, plus it's broken, so I'm not going to play it. Any activity I play is on challenging most of the time, because difficulties above heroic and legendary, or mainly heroic, they just feel less rewarding for the amount of time invested and the increased risk of not being able to actually complete the content that you're playing. I do not play the Dark Zone right now, mainly due to the PvP issues rather than its rewarding issues. Right now I free roam, completing control points on challenging, sometimes doing shorter, more rewarding missions if I require a specific item for a build, and that's about it. Right now, with leagues and the global events, I have been doing other things to complete these events, but I do not think these events are very rewarding either, and that's a separate issue. I only started the global event yesterday on day 3 because I'm simply not interested in the rewards. I really think the exotic cash should not duplicate what you have unless you already have every exotic. I've got one new exotic. Actually, I've not got any new exotics from a cache yet, and that's just severely frustrating for the amount of time that you're investing in order to get that cash or to get that final reward. Moving on to the next question. With the mechanics like targeted loot, seasons, specific loot sources for exotics in place, is that enough to have a good character progression, or do you see improvements? I've touched on this a little with what we talked about already. Targeted loot is not generous at all and completely unreliable. Sometimes you can get quite a few items, other times you'll get nothing. Playing as a solo player is far less rewarding than playing as a group, which is understandable but is still a little bit frustrating as a solo player. Whilst I try my very best to use targeted loot when I require it, most of the time it feels like time wasted. Why don't mission completions reward targeted loot instead of general loot? I really think the devs need to address the infrequent drops of targeted loot, maybe increase the drop chance substantially with a consideration of every loot drop being that of the targeted loot in missions. I know that would make me play missions a lot more for the targeted loot I needed. Seasons are meh. I've never been a fan of the whole battle pass thing, especially when it could be replacing good quality game modes. The whole leveling up of the season pass, it's fine, and at least it feels like you are achieving something as you progress through it, but it's redundant very quickly. I took my time with the season specifically because I didn't want to go through it too quickly, and it still only took me 4 weeks to reach level 100. Then what? The events within seasons are okay, but I'm going to repeat this again. We've been playing these missions for over a year, and yet these leagues and global events want you to run these same missions again. It's boring, and the rewards tied to these events, they're underwhelming at best. Exotic hunting can be fun when exotics are worth getting. That's not the case for most of them, so right now, no, they're just simply not worth it. I see some significant improvements can be made here. Next up, and my favourite subject, vendors. Are you happy where the vendors currently are, or what could be improved? Vendors are a catch-22 situation. It wasn't long ago that people were clan hopping to get the best vendor items, and that's something we don't want to return. But I take that over what we have right now. Firstly, vendors should not be selling purple gear once you reach World Tier 5 or level 40. In the Division, vendors sold caches and well-rolled items after Title Update 1.4, which I think worked really, really well. I never remember vendors being an issue in the Division after that. Caches would allow us to pick a specific brand cache or gear set cache with a chance of getting a gold-rolled item. They'd have to ensure the minimum percentage roll isn't too low, or we could be in the same position. This would at least give us an opportunity to spend our credits or materials on a specific piece of gear or brand item or weapon or whatever that you want. Cassie Mendoza needs to significantly increase the amount of good loot she sells, because it's pretty atrocious considering she's meant to be the gun runner and you have to actually find her first. There is something that you need to do in order to get to her, and yet the loot that she gives you, it's just so underwhelming. It's on the same level as all the other vendors in the game. It's really poor, and vendors are just pointless at in-game. Really, really pointless. They need to be addressed as soon as possible. Moving on to the last question on this particular subject. With TU8, the amount of loot that you got was lowered. Did this improve the experience, or how could it be changed now after TU9? Quite simply, this did not improve the experience at all, for the reasons I've explained already. Now we get less loot, and most of it is just deconstructed immediately. This will get progressively worse as well, because right now, most people are picking up loot, myself included, to fill their recalibration library rather than actually use that gear in the build that they've got. The more that the recal library is filled, the less often you're going to be picking that loot up because you've already got it. Couple this with chests dropping purple loot, even at control points where you have to take it back to open the door to get to these chests. You know, you're just seeing it's just going to get worse unless they do something about it. Honestly, what is the point of chests? What's the purpose of chests? What value do they add to the game? There is nothing to spend materials on really, because loot drops are bad most of the time, so you barely use the recal station, and crafting is so useless you're not using that either. There is an abundance of material chests in the game, so why is purple gear needed? Why are those chests needed with purple gear in them? The devs need to be way more generous to players, I feel. Mod drops, they just drop far too often, and just like loot in general, they are useless 99.9% of the time. Not just useless in their attribute percentage, which is normally very low, but I think mods in general are pretty useless right now, and I cannot see their value. Adding an extra couple of % of health to a drone is going to do nothing whatsoever. They're absolutely useless. The loot drops make it impossible for players to actually move up difficulty within the game. Unlike a lot of other looter shooter games, the power you can get from drops on your current difficulty level is only enough for that difficulty level and not any difficulty above, which means the transition from, say, challenging to heroic is just brutal because you're not powered enough. Most looter shooters give you the power for the next difficulty, and I don't feel like the Division 2 does that well at all. That's it for today's video though, guys. Overall, I do prefer Gear 2.0 a lot more compared to the pie gear ranges we had before Warlords, but as always, I feel as though the devs just don't want to be generous, probably out of fear of players getting fully powered too quickly. But like I've said before, not everyone is going to stick around with the game. And would you rather they leave out of frustration because they felt unrewarded, you know, leaving a sour taste in their mouth, or would you rather they leave because they ran out of content? One of these will guarantee players never return, and the other will guarantee players come back when there's new content. I know which one I'd prefer. Thanks very much for all your support on my videos, guys. I know the Division 2 is going through a rough patch at the moment, but as always, I'm going to be here through it all, just like I did with the Division 1 when we had similar rough patches. Until the next one, guys, hope you all have a fantastic weekend. Epic out.